When I wanted to go on a sudden trip, I never thought this would happen to me, but I saw a ghost, a real one. This is where it all started. I'd always been one for spontaneous decisions. Some might call it reckless, but to me, it was freedom. A road trip on a whim, an open highway, and nothing to answer to but the endless road ahead. That's how I found myself driving alone through the darkening countryside on an old, winding road. The radio was playing softly, an indie band I didn't recognize, and the only thing that kept me company was the sound of my tires humming along the asphalt. The sun was setting behind me, casting an amber glow across the horizon. The town I'd left behind was far enough to feel like a distant memory, and the next one wouldn't be for miles. I had no particular destination in mind, just the road and me, a simple joy in the solitude. But the serenity of the moment shattered when my car sputtered, then came to a sudden halt. I sighed, letting my hands drop from the wheel. The road ahead was dark, and my headlights only illuminated the thick, wild trees that bordered the stretch of highway. I tried to restart the engine, but it didn't respond. Great. Just great. I was out in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place where even your GPS doesn't bother to check in. I was alone, miles from the nearest gas station, and my phone had lost signal hours ago. All I had was my half-full water bottle and a backpack stuffed with snacks. Not exactly survival gear. I pulled out my phone and checked for any signal again, but the screen stayed stubbornly blank. With a frustrated groan, I stepped out of the car. The cool evening air hit my skin, ruffling my hair and sending a shiver down my spine. I locked the car behind me, knowing it was pointless to try and figure out what was wrong with the engine in the dark. The only thing I could do was wait, but as I looked around, something caught my eye. A faint light flickered through the trees, not too far ahead. It was the kind of dim, pulsing glow you get from an old neon sign, the kind you see in movies, advertising something run down, forgotten. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight, slipped it into my pocket, and set off toward the light, deciding I'd at least see if there was a place to ask for help. As I walked down the narrow, overgrown path that led off the road, the light grew stronger. It was an old hotel. At least, that's what the faded sign suggested. The letters were worn and chipped, but I could still make out the name, the Haven Inn. The hotel was tucked away behind an overgrown hedge, sitting on the edge of the woods as though it had been forgotten by time. It wasn't the sort of place I'd usually stop, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I hesitated at the entrance. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a single car, old, dusty, and parked under a flickering street lamp. The windows were dark, and there was an eerie quietness about the place, as though it hadn't seen visitors in years. But I needed to get inside, and this was the only option. The door creaked as I pushed it open. A bell above the door chimed softly, but no one appeared at the desk. The lobby was dimly lit, with old wooden furniture scattered about. The smell of stale air and old carpets hit me immediately, and I wrinkled my nose. Still, it seemed like a decent enough place to crash for the night. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty room. "Anyone here?" It felt like I was speaking into a void, until a man appeared from behind a door at the back of the lobby. He was tall, with a pale face and a thin, graying beard. His eyes were dark, almost too dark, like they didn't belong in his face. He gave me a thin smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Welcome to the Haven Inn," he said, his voice gravelly. "Can I help you?" Yeah. My car broke down just up the road," I explained, offering him a strained smile. "I was hoping I could stay the night." Just until I get my car fixed. Of course, he said, his gaze lingering on me a moment too long. I'll get you checked in right away. He moved behind the counter, his steps heavy on the creaky floorboards. As I followed him to the desk, I couldn't help but notice how quiet the hotel was. Too quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin itch. It felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something or someone. The man didn't seem to be in any rush. His fingers moved slowly over the keys of an old, dusty computer, and when he handed me the key to my room, his eyes lingered on mine a little too long again. Room 7, he said, nodding toward the stairs. Upstairs, at the end of the hall. Thanks, I said, trying to keep my tone friendly, but the unease creeping in was hard to ignore. I grabbed my bag, made my way up the narrow staircase, and found the room. It wasn't much, barely big enough for a bed and a nightstand, but it was better than nothing. The bed was old, the sheets rumpled, but the mattress seemed comfortable enough. I sat down and took a deep breath, trying to shake off the nagging feeling that something was off. Just as I started to relax, the lights above flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The room was plunged into darkness. I jumped to my feet, feeling around the nightstand for the flashlight I had tucked into my bag. Before I could even get it in my hand, I heard it. Faint at first, a soft whispering coming from the hallway. It was distant, like someone was calling my name. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, staring at the door. The whisper grew louder. Natalie. I didn't know who or what it was, but I knew one thing. This wasn't just a broken light bulb. I never thought this would be just the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt me forever. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The whispering continued, growing ever so slightly louder, more urgent. My name, Natalie, was repeated, but it didn't sound like a human voice. It was almost too soft, like a distant breeze or the rustling of leaves. My pulse quickened, and I took a step back, my back hitting the wall. I had to be imagining things. Maybe it was the wind outside, maybe even the old pipes in the walls. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. This place, this hotel, had an aura about it, a feeling that crawled beneath my skin and made every hair on my neck stand up. I forced myself to move, grabbing the flashlight from the bed and shining it toward the door. The whisper stopped abruptly, as if it had been waiting for me to make the first move. My breath caught in my throat. "Hello?" I called out, my voice wavering despite myself. "Is someone there?" No answer. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. The only sound was the faint hum of an old air conditioner somewhere down the hall, struggling to keep the room cool. I could feel my heart beating faster. But curiosity, stupid, reckless curiosity, drove me to open the door. I stepped into the hallway, the flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. The carpet was worn, its once red hue faded to a sickly pink. The walls, cracked and peeling, seemed to close in around me, as if the very building itself were watching. I turned the flashlight up and down the hall. It was long, narrow, and eerily empty. At the far end, a few doors were slightly ajar, but no one appeared to be inside. The air smelled stale, like dust and old memories that had been left to fester for years. I felt an overwhelming urge to turn back to my room, to lock the door and hide under the covers until morning. But the whispering, it wouldn't let me go. It was like a thread pulling me down the hallway, dragging me towards something I couldn't see but could feel. Slowly, I walked forward, the sound of my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The air grew colder, and my breath began to mist in front of me, even though the heat in the hallway hadn't changed. My fingers tightened around the flashlight, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. At the end of the hall, I spotted something odd. A door, slightly cracked open, that hadn't been there before. It wasn't one of the rooms I had seen earlier. It wasn't labeled, and there was no sign to suggest it was a place guests could go. Without thinking, I found myself moving toward it, compelled by something I couldn't explain. As I approached, the door creaked as if it were inviting me in. I pushed it open slowly, the light from my flashlight trembling in the space beyond. Inside was a lounge, but it was nothing like the rest of the hotel. It was neglected, with dust covering every surface. Broken chairs were piled in one corner, and an old, cracked mirror hung crookedly on the wall. The air was thick with the smell of mildew. Yet there was something wrong about the space, something unnatural. My gaze fell on the far wall, where a large yellowing photograph hung in an ornate frame. The faces in the picture were frozen in time, elegant, old-fashioned clothing, all smiles and laughter. But the longer I looked at the picture, the more it unsettled me. There was one face that stood out among them. A woman standing in the center, her eyes staring directly at me. I blinked. The resemblance was uncanny. She looked just like me. I took a step forward, my fingers brushing the frame. My breath caught in my throat. The woman in the photo had the same dark hair, the same sharp features. Even the expression on her face seemed eerily familiar. But this wasn't a coincidence. There was something about this place that felt like I'd been here before, like I was meant to be here. Suddenly, I heard it again, that whispering. But this time, it was clearer, closer. It wasn't just my name. It was a plea. Natalie, help me. I turned around, heart pounding in my chest. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure, a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothes, her long hair falling over her shoulders. She was translucent, almost glowing, as if she was made of light and shadow. Her face was pale, but her eyes, those dark, hollow eyes, held a depth that made my blood run cold. The whispering stopped, and the figure stepped forward. Her gaze fixed on me, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My legs were rooted to the spot, and my body was frozen in terror. Then, the figure lifted her hand, and I instinctively took a step back. Before I could react, the lights above me flickered. Once, twice, before plunging the hallway into total darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, but when the beam finally cut through the blackness, the woman was gone. My heart hammered in my chest as I swung the light around, but the hall was empty. I couldn't stay here anymore. I had to leave. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, and I could hear the faint sounds of something moving in the darkness. I turned and rushed back to my room, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, leaning against it for support. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. But then, just as I thought I might calm down, I heard it again. The whispering, soft and insistent. Natalie, help me. I didn't know what this place was, or who the woman was. But I couldn't escape it. Not yet. Not until I knew what she wanted. I had a feeling this was just the beginning of something much darker than I ever could have imagined. The darkness of the hotel pressed in on me as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the now locked door. My hands were still trembling from the encounter with the ghostly woman, but the terror was beginning to shift. The adrenaline that had fueled my flight down the hallway was wearing off, and in its place, a cold curiosity began to settle in. I couldn't stop thinking about the photograph, about the woman's face, about how it was so familiar, too familiar. Who was she? Why did she look like me? The hotel room, once merely unsettling, now felt like a trap. I could still hear the faint hum of the old air conditioner struggling in the background, and the smell of mildew in the air made me feel like I was suffocating. I knew I couldn't stay here forever. I needed to leave, to figure out what was happening, but fear held me in place. The whispering had stopped for now, but something told me it wouldn't stay quiet for long. I had to understand what was going on. There had to be a reason why I felt so connected to this place, to the people, no, the spirits that seemed trapped here. I reached for my bag, rummaging through it in search of my phone. It was no use. I knew the signal was still out, but I needed answers, and sometimes the past holds the key to everything. I remembered the journal I'd seen earlier tucked behind the front desk. It had seemed like an odd thing to leave out, an ancient-looking thing, with pages that had clearly been handled over the years. Maybe it would help me understand what the hell was happening in this place. With renewed determination, I stood up and left my room. The hallway was just as silent as before, the only sound my footsteps echoing off the wooden floorboards. I didn't know what I was hoping to find, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important, something hidden in plain sight, something that could explain the ghostly figure I had seen, and more importantly, why she seemed to want something from me. I made my way back to the lobby. The old man at the front desk was gone now, and the space felt even more lifeless without his strange presence. I approached the desk cautiously, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. The dim light cast long shadows across the floor, making everything seem like a half-remembered dream. Then, something caught my eye. The journal. It was still there, exactly where I had seen it before, as though it had been waiting for me. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it in my hands. The leather cover was cracked and faded, and the pages inside were yellow with age. I sat down on the creaky chair behind the desk and opened it. The first few pages were filled with notes, but they weren't written in a typical hand. The writing was shaky, as if the author had been distressed, even desperate. I flipped through the pages, skimming through the entries, until something finally caught my attention. There, in the middle of a page, was a name. Eleanor. The journal described her as someone who had worked at the hotel years ago. She had been the daughter of the hotel's original owner, a man named Samuel Reed. Eleanor had been close to the guests, loved by the staff, and known for her kindness. But something had happened to her one fateful night. The journal's entries became more frantic as it went on, describing a fire that had broken out in the hotel, a fire that had killed several people, including Eleanor's younger sister, who had been staying at the hotel that night. The entries were chaotic, but one thing stood out. According to the journal, the fire hadn't been an accident. Eleanor believed someone had set it deliberately. She had written that it was someone close to her, someone she trusted, who had caused the blaze. And before the fire consumed her room, Eleanor had sworn vengeance, vowing to uncover the truth. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the weight of her words. There was something deeply unsettling about her final entries, as if she knew she was being watched, as if the hotel itself was closing in on her. The final sentence was especially chilling. I will never leave until they know the truth. I will never rest until I find who did this. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The fire, the tragedy, Everything about this place was starting to make sense, but there was something I still couldn't grasp. Why was I here? Why did I feel such a strong pull to Eleanor's story? I closed the journal and stood up, my mind racing. The air felt heavier now, the silence more oppressive. As I turned to leave the lobby, I noticed something out of place. A door that had been hidden behind a dusty curtain. I had never seen it before. It was narrow, leading toward the back of the hotel, and there was no sign to indicate what was inside. I walked toward it without thinking. Something deep inside me urged me to open the door, to see what was hidden beyond it. The hallway leading to the door was dark, the lights flickering above, but I didn't hesitate. I reached for the doorknob and turned it slowly, wincing as the old wood creaked. Inside, the room was pitch black. The flashlight in my hand flickered before I even took a step forward, casting erratic beams of light across the walls. My heartbeat quickened, but I pushed through the fear. I felt something cold brush against my cheek, and I froze. The air had changed again. It was thicker, colder, and there was an unmistakable presence in the room. And then I saw it. A figure standing in the corner, her face obscured by shadows, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She looked just like me. The whispering started again, louder this time, clearer. "Natalie, you're the only one who can help me." My breath hitched. I stepped forward, the figure moving closer. This time I didn't feel fear. I felt something else. Something I couldn't name. I knew deep in my bones that I had to follow her. But where would it lead? I couldn't stop now. I had to know the truth, even if it meant I would never leave this hotel the same way again. The room felt different now, heavier, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on me. The air was thick, damp, and the shadows stretched unnaturally across the corners. The woman in the corner, no, it wasn't a woman, not really, stepped forward, her body just a blur of movement in the dark, until her face came into the light. And I froze. It was her again, the woman from the photograph, the ghostly figure with the hollow, dark eyes. The same eyes that stared at me from the mirror in the lobby. The same eyes that felt like they were burning into my soul. But something was different now. Her eyes weren't just vacant and cold. They were filled with something else now. Something urgent. "You have to help me, Natalie," she whispered. Her voice wasn't the gentle, pleading tone I had heard before. It was raw, desperate, as if she had been waiting for this moment for years. Her voice echoed, almost like it was coming from everywhere at once. It wrapped around me like a vice, making it hard to breathe. I couldn't move. My body was stiff, locked in place. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, my legs carried me forward, step by shaky step, as if my body was being controlled by something far stronger than my will. I couldn't stop myself from walking toward her. The closer I got, the colder the air became, and I felt a chill creeping down my spine. I don't understand," I managed to croak, my voice barely a whisper. "Who are you? Why do you look like me?" She stepped closer, her feet barely making a sound as they skimmed the floor. Her long, dark hair hung in tangled waves around her face, her skin pale and translucent, as if she didn't belong to this world at all. Her eyes glimmered with a sorrow that made my chest ache. "Because I am you," she whispered. "At least, I was. I was once a part of this place, and now I'm trapped here. Trapped with all of them." I felt the cold grip of panic clutch my heart, and I backed up a few steps, but the sensation was not the fear of being in the presence of a ghost. It was the fear of the unknown, of what she was about to reveal. I could already feel it. The pull of this place was consuming me. I was starting to feel like I belonged here, like I had always belonged here. The woman reached out, her hand brushing against my arm. It was like ice. Her fingers slid across my skin with a sickening coldness that made my stomach lurch. A flash of images came to me then. Flashes of fire, screams, dark shadows dancing through the smoke. And then, her, Eleanor. Her voice echoed in my mind, her name a low murmur against the panic that threatened to overtake me. The images grew more intense, more vivid. The flames devoured the hotel. I saw her, Eleanor, standing in the center of the inferno, her eyes wild with rage and fear. She wasn't trying to escape. She was reaching for something, someone. A hand outstretched, grasping toward the one person who had betrayed her. The flames swallowed her, and the scream that followed was enough to shatter my nerves, sending shockwaves of fear through my entire body. I stumbled backward, unable to tear my eyes away from the ghostly vision. My heart raced, blood rushing in my ears, and I felt like I was drowning in it all. The fire, the voices, the cold that gripped me like a vice. "Stop!" I cried, my voice shaking with terror. "What is this? Why are you showing me this?" But Eleanor didn't answer. She only tilted her head slightly, as if she were studying me, reading me like an open book. "You can feel it too, can't you?" she asked, her voice like a soft hiss. "You're part of it now, Natalie. You're in this place, tied to it, as much as I am." My chest tightened. She was right. I felt it, like an invisible thread pulling me deeper into the hotel's heart, into its very soul. The place was alive, feeding off of our fear, our pain. It wanted me to stay. I turned away, desperate to escape, but the hallway outside my room was no longer the same. The once familiar space now stretched impossibly long, the walls closing in on me, suffocating. The lights flickered and dimmed as if the hotel itself was slowly dying, its life force bleeding out into the air. Behind me, Eleanor's voice echoed, sharp and insistent. "Don't run, Natalie." "You can't run. There's no escape from what this place wants. You're a part of it now." I stumbled through the hallway, my breath ragged, my heart hammering against my chest. I thought if I could just reach the front door, if I could just break free from the suffocating weight of the hotel's presence, I could escape. I had to escape. But the hallway wouldn't end. It stretched endlessly in front of me, looping back on itself like a labyrinth. The walls seemed to move, warping and bending. The doors I passed no longer looked like hotel rooms. They looked like prison cells, each one with eyes staring back at me from behind their dusty, cracked windows. Faces, horrible faces of people who had once stayed here, now trapped, their souls bound to this cursed place. I could hear their whispers now, faint at first, then growing louder. Their voices were a cacophony of anguish, desperation, and rage, all pleading for something I didn't understand. But I did understand, on some deep, primal level. The hotel wasn't just a building. It wasn't just a place of memories or ghosts. It was a trap. A snare set to catch the souls of anyone who came too close. I rounded a corner and then I saw it. The front door, the exit, the way out. But it was covered in flames. Not real flames, not the kind that would burn, but flickering, blackened embers that flickered in and out of existence, like a twisted reflection of a fire long since gone out. The door pulsed with a sinister energy, as if the hotel itself was holding it shut, refusing to let me leave. I reached for the doorknob, my fingers trembling, but before I could touch it, a shadow moved in the corner of my eye. I turned, too late. The fire flared up suddenly and the air turned ice cold. I saw the figure of a man in the flames, his face twisted in agony. A cold chill swept over me as his eyes locked onto mine, and then everything went black. The hotel had claimed me, and now I was just like them, trapped forever. I don't know how long I stood there in the dark, the echoes of my pulse in my ears, my mind reeling from everything that had happened. Eleanor's presence was still with me, her eyes burning into the back of my skull. The hotel had finally claimed me, as I had feared. The room around me felt like it was closing in, the air too thick to breathe. I tried to move, to step forward, but I felt them, the spirits, pressing in, their cold fingers brushing my skin. They were all waiting for me to make the final choice, and I was caught. In the dark, I finally understood what Eleanor had been saying. The truth was more horrifying than I had ever imagined. The fire, the betrayal, the endless suffering, it was all connected, all part of the cycle that had trapped everyone who walked through these doors. But the most horrifying part of it all was the realization that I was now a part of that cycle. The hotel hadn't just trapped the souls of its guests, it had consumed them, and it was hungry. A voice, deep and distorted, broke through my thoughts. It was the man I had seen in the flames, the one whose face had haunted me, twisting in agony. He was alive, his soul still burning in the depths of the hotel. "You're just like us now," he whispered, his voice a low growl that made my skin crawl. "You can never leave. No one leaves." I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the dark. My feet were heavy as I tried to back away, but the hotel itself wouldn't let me go. Every step I took felt like I was sinking deeper into the abyss, pulled down by an invisible force. My mind screamed for escape, but there was nowhere to run. Suddenly, Eleanor's voice pierced the air again, louder now, almost frantic. "End it, Natalie. End it, or you'll never escape." The words hung in the air like a rope, and for the first time, I understood. The key wasn't running away. It was destroying the source of the pain. But to do that, I would have to break the cycle, confront the darkness head on. I didn't want to. I couldn't. But there was no other choice. I turned, ready to face the truth. The final confrontation had begun. Actually, I never thought I'd end up here. The lines between right and wrong blurred, and I crossed a line I knew I shouldn't have. It wasn't supposed to happen. They weren't supposed to be like this. But now I can't look away, can't forget the pull, the fire that kept us coming back. What are we now? I wish I knew. What do you think? Has the line between forbidden and desire ever felt this thin for you? Leave a comment and share your thoughts below.